They said it like a joke told too close to a cliff. We put your name on it. Uncle Richard, same as you signing. You don't mind, right? The laugh came first, the eye contact second, the paper last. Paper always comes last when people think the talking has already done the work. I set the page on the kitchen table and squared the corners to the wood grain as if alignment could restore dignity. The house was quiet except for the clock above the stove, keeping time no one had asked it to keep. Lemon oil from last week's polishing lingered in the air. Clean cotton from folded towels rested by the sink. I didn't touch the pen they'd left behind. I looked at the signature they tried to grow in my handwriting like counterfeit ivy. My name, Richard Mallory, looped the way mine does, but not with my patience. They had hurried the downstroke on the R, guessed at the small pause before the tail of the Y. Close. Close is how most people ruin themselves. Close convinces them they've crossed. I didn't speak. Silence makes a room smaller. I wanted them to feel the walls move in. My nephew shifted from foot to foot, tugging his jacket cuff, as if to shorten the distance between us. His wife leaned on the chair back, knuckles white, eyes bright with overconfidence people mistake for certainty. It's all approved, she added, the words softened like a towel over glass. They said having your name made the rate friendly. Friendly? I've seen friendly interest compound into eviction. Friendly favors turn teeth loose. I lifted the paper and held it to the light. The bank's logo bled a little where a sweaty hand had gripped it. The notary stamp was there, the circle crisp as a halo around a false saint. Where? I asked. They blinked. Where what? Where did you sign this? I said. And who watched you become me? He gave a half laugh. At the branch up on Cedar. They said it was fine as long as I put the paper down. The clock ticked. My coffee had gone cold beside my right hand, a gray film skimming the surface like a small winter. Take the pen, I said, nodding at it. It's not mine. He reached, eager to tidy the scene, eager for everything to go back to what it was before he walked in with Adet wearing my clothes. You're not mad? He ventured. Mad is for people surprised by the world. I don't do surprise. I do columns. You've done what you've done, I said. Go home. At the door, his wife set a hand on my shoulder, a gesture that might have been affection in a different life. Thank you, she whispered, which was the strangest sentence of the night. The latch clicked behind them, a small truth in an old house. I stayed at the table, tracing the wood scars with a fingertip. I remembered other tables. My father's, where bills spread like maps. My brother's hardware counter, where I taught him that numbers have temperatures some hot enough to burn your hands, some cold enough to ruin your fingers if you hold too long. I remembered my nephew at 16 knee-bouncing while I balanced his checkbook. It's just math, Uncle, he'd said. You make it dramatic. He thought steadiness was theater. He thought reckoning was a performance someone else staged for him. I rinsed the cup and set it upside down on the towel. When you spend a life keeping other people's accounts from capsizing, you learn to move without noise. In the study, I took down the black folder I keep for emergencies, the one with no label on the spine. Inside, spare tabs, blank paper, envelopes. I slid a tab into place and wrote, Neat and Sure, Mallory Recovery. Under it, 4 subtabs, Buras, Bank, Notary, Colorado, Unsell. A 5th I left blank. You don't name the last room until you've walked there. I laid their paper in, not as confession, but as exhibit. Then I turned off the lamp and let the study return to a dark that held its own breath. Late autumn pressed its face to the windows. Sycamore leaves gathered against the curb like brown boats waiting a tide. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked once and reconsidered. Quiet arrived in larger pieces. I poured a glass of water, the cold waking my palm, and sat to make lists. Betrayal steals rhythm. Your days limp after acts like this. Lists teach them how to walk again. Credit freeze. Alerts. Fraud affidavit. Identity theft report. Police incident number. Notary commission verification. Preservation letters to bank counsel for all video and logs. Demand for rescission. I drew small boxes beside each doorways I meant to close. One more line, separate and steadier. Acquisitions. The 5th tab found its name. Sometimes a destination names itself as soon as you agree to travel. People think revenge is heat. In my experience, it's winter. It asks you to slow your heart until the noise can't hear it. It asks you to preserve, to stack, to wait. I slept little. Sleep was a guest I didn't mind disappointing. I walked my halls instead, a vessel trimmed by my own hand, baseboards clean, frames square, the closet's cedar breathing faintly each time I passed. I counted doorways like beads. Before dawn, I boiled water for oatmeal. There is a sweetness if you let it be itself and stop insisting on sugar. Steam fogged the glass. My finger drew two unmeant lines their downbeats at the start of a hymn. I ate standing. The folder's weight sat patient on the table. When the sun lowered itself into the street like a tired promise, I dressed. Slate blazer, clean shirt, shoes for rooms where numbers are argued into being true. I slid the folder into my satchel and checked my reflection, not for beauty, but consistency. Hair combed back, lines where laughter used to live, eyes clear. I nodded to the man who has to do what I have always done. Balance the book. The florist on spruce opens early. The notary lives above it. The stairs smell of wet stems and old catalogs. She knows me by carefulness, not by name. Morning, she said, stamping the word out like a seal. The affidavit took the bite of the press and left a raised ring, a soft, decisive kiss that says we agree to the truth. At the bank, I did not sit, and I did not accept coffee that teaches urgency to cool. I asked for the branch manager and stood while she read, eyes flicking as if praying for smaller font. Our legal department, she began, will preserve recordings at your request. I finished. I wrote the case number on my pad the way a man writes a verse to remember. Paper came in warm stacks, toner a metallic heat. I scanned for shape first, then weighed for lies. A still from the signing room. My nephew's jacket, glossy as new money under cheap light. His wife's hand on the chair, a claim tag. Know me. Ceiling cameras do not negotiate. They see what they see, without history. Outside, morning tasted metallic, like rain that changed its mind. I walked the long block by the river before getting in the car. Cottonwoods shook off threads that shone like stray ledger lines. I thought of my brother counting screws while I taught his inventory to tell the truth. Rich, the world trusts a straight shelf, he'd say. He liked calling me back to usefulness. At home, I slid the copies under bank, the way a joiner seats a mortise and tenon. I called the attorney I trust the one who never confuses kindness with softness. Her keyboard made the dry rain of diligence. We'll file the identity theft report, she said. Notice the bank's fraud unit, demand rescission, and send preservation letters today. Criminal charges? The room held the question like a bowl holds a dark apple. Not yet, I said. I want gravity first, then noise. When we hung up, the house resumed its old heartbeat. The kettle readied itself again. My phone buzzed. All good on the truck this weekend? Need to haul some materials. Pivoting to the next ask while the last still swallowed the room. In the shop, I replied, hope work picks up. He'd misread it as habit. He wouldn't see the fence post going in, one clean thunk at a time. Afternoon folded itself like a letter slid under a door. I checked boxes notary, bank, preservation, and left bureaus for morning, when the sun requests clarity. Under acquisitions, I wrote smaller. Observe transfer patterns. Debts move when they're frightened. They seek new owners the way animals seek holes. I can wait by a hole longer than hunger itself. Night brought wood smoke on the air, and a neighbor's wind bells. I stood in my doorway, breathing like a man who finished a long sum and watched the last number come home. Across the room, the folder lay closed, edges square. I turned off the lamp. Sleep came like a good verdict, late, inevitable, clean. The last thought wasn't anger. It was arithmetic. They borrowed a name they couldn't afford. By morning, I would begin the payments in a currency they'd never learned to count. By morning, I had a list. Not of names, but of actions. Actions are cleaner than feelings. Feelings spill. Actions file. I set the percolator clicking like a metronome and opened a fresh legal pad. Page 1. Freeze credit. I called all 3 bureaus and planted alerts like fence posts. Anyone trying my name would meet a gate before a door. Page 2. Affidavit of fraud. My pen moved slowly, not from doubt but from care. If they wanted my name, they would now read it in my own letters. Countersigned and notarized. The notary seal left a shallow bruise you could feel with your finger. She glanced at the forgery beside my true hand. Seen worse, she said. I nodded, slid the page back into the envelope, and carried my patience to the bank. Banks offer coffee because they intend to keep you sitting. I didn't sit. Loan file, notary log, sign-in sheet, room video, I said. People fear what they've neglected. They brought photocopies in stages, stapled stacks exhaling warm toner. I read with the eye I've sharpened over decades. Fast for shape, slow for weight. The notary commission number belonged to a traveling clerk, not licensed for field work. The visitor book bore my name, written by a stranger who had studied me badly. The ceiling camera caught 2 figures and a stack of paper. My nephew in that navy jacket with its cheap sheen, his wife standing behind him, palm on the back of his chair the way people touch property. "Know me. If what you're alleging is true," the manager began softly. "It isn't an allegation," I said, tapping the still with a forefinger. "It's a math problem." On the way home, I drove the river road, cottonwood threads blowing like early snow. Memory slid in. My brother at his counter one hard winter, inventory sheets stubborn as ice, his grin when columns finally kissed. "Rich, you see the world in columns." He'd been right. Columns keep a building standing. They also keep a story from lying. Back at my kitchen table, I made a new folder spine. Mallory, recovery now heavier with subtabs. I added a fifth and left it blank, then, unable to resist the future, wrote a single small word under it. Acquisitions. Some rooms you label only after you've walked them. Some you label because you already recognize the furniture. I phoned an attorney who understands how to make truth heavy before it is loud. She built the skeleton while I spoke. Identity theft report, police report, bank fraud notice, rescission, preservation letters. "Criminal?" she asked again. "Later," I said. "I prefer arithmetic to appetite." A courier in a jacket too thin for the season came to the door, his breath smoking in the air. I handed him the packet and had the sensation of sliding a pawn. Pawns are honest. They teach people you will actually play. My phone pinged that evening. "Unc, about the truck. The audacity's never in the scheme. It's in the timing." "In the shop," I wrote. They would read non-cooperation as confusion. Some people only recognize resistance when you slap their hand. Mine would be a door that looked open right up until it wasn't. By afternoon, the attorney called from a number that carries its own seriousness. Reports filed, bank on notice, footage preserved, counsel awake. She breathed. "Their family," she said. "Not as argument, but weather report." "That's why I'm careful," I answered. Care isn't the opposite of ruthlessness. Often it's the engine. I spent the evening assembling proofs of who I am. Old tax returns, my mortgage with my blue ink on it, notarized signature cards, even an invoice for a roof repair with the same impatient lift before my arch. Under the warm buzz of the study lamp, I photographed everything, even light, even truth. Morning brought a call from the bank's counsel with the tone of someone deciding whether to apologize now or after they're sued. Room logs reviewed, no entry by me, 2 by them. Notary stamp, misused. Visitor book, handwriting trying and failing to be mine. "We'll void the note as to Mr. Mallory," he said, "and seek recovery from the actual parties." His words, not mine. "Put it in writing," I said, "and send it to my attorney." Oatmeal again, eaten standing. There is mercy and blandness when you don't want your emotions flirting with sugar. Outside, weekday noises rehearsed purpose. Inside, the 5th tab finally asked for ink. I printed the word I'd been saving. Acquisitions. Their debt would move debts always do. Discounts happen in the shadows while people are still insisting everything's fine. Somewhere soon, a package including their loan would be offered to a buyer with a stomach for numbers and patience for paper. I have both. And I have a trust I once built because it is my habit to have places for things when they fall. An old family farm gave it a name. Paper loves propriety. Paper loves a distance where feelings used to live. By late afternoon, the rescission letter arrived, a thin apology wearing legal clothes. My name stepped back off their obligation. The obligation stepped forward toward its rightful owners, the way a dog returns to a voice it recognizes. They didn't call me. They called the wind with their excuses and hoped it would carry them. I sharpened a pencil and wrote a new page for the folder. Servicers to watch. Brokers who buy sour notes. Transfer timing quarter end. Bid window. Diligence packet. I listed the documents I would request when the time came. Payment history. Collateral file. Alongas. Assignments. Title. I underlined assignment chain. Paper tells on people who believe in it too much. Night slowed the house to a heartbeat. Through the window, I could see the sycamore's great arm against a navy sky. I thought of how they had laughed in my kitchen, how light their voices had been, how sure. That kind of certainty isn't conviction. It's malnutrition. They hadn't fed themselves discipline. They'd fed themselves loophole. Loophole has no marrow. I closed the folder and slid it into the drawer. The wood answered wood with a soft catch I've loved since the first day I repaired this desk. I let the quiet gather around me like a coat. When the notice came that their loan had been transferred, I would meet the new holder, or be him. That would be the beginning of the end. It doesn't arrive with trumpets. It arrives with the same sound as the notary's seal, a soft, certain thud. And because patience is a skill I have practiced until it is a habit, I slept without hurry and woke without hate, ready to wait by the hole. It began with the envelope. Pale cream, thicker than junk, my name printed neatly in the window. The return address wasn't the bank. It belonged to a servicing company with sharper teeth and less small talk. I slid it open with the brass knife I've kept since college. Notice of transfer of debt. My name absent this time. Theirs, bold and black. The total amount climbed higher than any ladder they had ever built. I laid the letter on the oak, the same desk where I'd balanced accounts for men who never said thank you. The grooves on the surface are mine, tiny ticks from a pen nib pressed too hard while thinking. I traced them and let memory bring me a boy of 16 in my garage, asking me to co-sign his first car. His charm had a slick sheen, the kind that works on parties but not on ledgers. Still, I signed then. Years later, he signed me without me. Debt is patient when it wants to teach. The phone rang that afternoon. My attorney's voice was clipped, calm. Transfers real. Packages in motion. We have a window. Windows matter. Air moves through them. So can intent. How clean is the file? I asked. Messy enough to discount, she said. Noisier than most. Good for buyers like whoever we find. The trust I had shelved years back woke up. I had named it for a farm we sold when I was young, a place where fences stayed mended and tools were returned to their hooks. The trustee paperwork still fit like a coat that had been tailored for a younger man and held its shape. Diligence is not glamorous. It's phone time and comp files and emails with subject lines that could put a clerk to sleep. I asked for the collateral file, payment history, call logs, alongas, assignments. I wanted to see the chain like a spine. The broker who deals in notes no one wants to babysit sent a data tape that smelled metaphorically of dust. My tea went cold reading it. Missed payments, late payments, then a scatter of partials like apologies delivered through a door. We moved quickly, but never in a hurry. The trust made its interest known without a signature anyone could gossip over. A number went across a wire not large enough to raise eyebrows, not small enough to be laughed at. A counter came back, then a silence, then a soft yes. People think victory makes a sound. In my experience, it makes space. A week later, the goodbye. Hello letters went out, the ones that tell borrowers whom they now owe. Their envelopes glided through the same postal system that delivers birthday cards and jury summons. Inside, polite sentences move the axis of their lives an inch. Little inches matter when you owe money that never sleeps. They didn't call me. They called the trust number and left voicemails that my attorney forwarded because paper likes a record and sound is paper's cousin. My nephew's voice was smaller than his body as he explained that a job was almost there, that a month would save them, that the children had been sick, that winter had been long. None of those things change arithmetic. Arithmetic changes those things. The first month under the new servicer, they paid barely. A check arrived late, thin even in its paper. I held it the way a man holds proof. Money is language. That small sum said, we feel the leash. We know who holds it. The second month, no payment. The automated letter went out. Neutral font, plain words, no moral. The third month, a partial. I told counsel to accept it. Every dollar is a confession, I said. File the tape. The town's eyes shifted, the way small towns do when someone's weather turns. At the grocery, cards declined quietly. At church, greetings shaved themselves thinner. I watched from 2 pews back, hymn book open, voice still. They didn't look at me. Suspicion isn't proof, but it weighs more. I visited them once on a Sunday under a sky the color of cheap tin. The house had the smell of old takeout and damp laundry. He talked of projects, of opportunities, of how things turn, all spinning words that try to outrun a ledger. His wife stood with a mug she never drank from. I accepted a glass of water and said little. When he joked that something miraculous must have happened to untangle that loan mess, I smiled carefully. Miracles, I said, always come with an invoice. You just don't see it right away. Driving home, I thought of the quiet satisfaction of not needing to raise a hand. The system is an old river. If you know its bends, you can let it carry the stones you place. Under acquisitions, I added a page. Forbearance, number strict compliance. People hear kindness in soft words and think policy changes. I prefer policy that teaches. By late spring, missed payments outnumbered received ones. Late fees bloomed across their balance like mildew in shade. I didn't accelerate. I annotated. Silence does more work when it holds a pen. One humid evening, I drove past their place. The Navy truck was gone, replaced by a rusted sedan that coughed when it moved. Repossession doesn't announce itself. It leaves an empty rectangle of oil on concrete. Children played in the yard with the aimless joy children possess. The adults' laughter sounded like something remembered instead of felt. At my kitchen table, I indexed every call, every letter, every check. The file grew thicker. Weight is a kind of truth. I added tabs. Default, notice, title check. My pencil moved without flourish. Foreclosure options appeared on the page not as hunger, but as weather forecast. Not fantasy. They texted me once during this season. 4 words. Can we talk, please? I set the phone face down on the table and let the clock answer. A new letter arrived midsummer. The kind that changes temperature in a room. Notice of default. Neutral sentences strung together like fence wire. My name on none of it, my hand in all of it. Silence is the most patient handwriting I know. I watered the garden that evening and waved to a neighbor. Fireflies pulsed over the hedges. The world kept doing its ordinary work while the math on my nephew's table chewed through wood, fabric, sleep. Inside, I closed season 2. Part 1, the way I close any ledger day. With a straight line under the last entry and a small note to tomorrow. Prepare the door you may need to walk through. Doors like to be warned. The first autumn letter to them was plain. We have not received your scheduled installment. No adjectives, no injuries. Interest doesn't raise its voice, it compounds. The second letter was less plain. Fees, dates, totals, a calendar of consequence. My attorney doesn't dramatize, she enumerates. I approved every line without changing a comma. Mercy isn't miscalculation. If mercy comes, it will come with both eyes open. They sent a smaller check and a note that used the word tight 3 times. Tight is the feeling you get when a noose has the courtesy to warn you. I told the servicer to accept the partial and apply it per policy. Policy is dignity in a uniform. At church, their pew stayed empty. In the hardware store, people spoke their names the way you speak a lesson. At the diner, a waitress said to no one in particular, "It's a shame," and topped off coffee that didn't need it. Reputation is a credit line that calls itself in. I saw them once through a car window on a windy Saturday. They stood outside a narrow duplex with paint peeling near the gutters. He lifted a box and set it down and lifted it again, as if weight could be negotiated. She held a child's hand, but not tightly. I watched for a minute too long and then drove on, the engine telling me to mind my business. My business was the math. Back at my desk, I prepared what winter requires. Title search clean enough to sail. Property taxes delinquent. Insurance thin and guessed at. I made a list under evidence of how the documents would speak if asked. The notary's misuse, the room logs, the visitor book with my name walked badly by a stranger's hand, the ceiling photo. Paper testifies best when it's bored. Boredom is honesty's native weather. A voicemail from my nephew played in my ear that night. The servicer had forwarded it as artifact. He spoke quickly, and then slowly, and then quickly again, as if pace could change content. He promised next month would fix last month and said the word kids in a way meant to harvest pity. Pity is not a line item. If you put it in a ledger, it rots everything around it. I added a new subtab, remedies. It's a calm word for a hard set of tools. Acceleration. Notice of sale. Occupancy checks. Cash for keys, maybe. If they earned a soft landing by cooperating. People imagine revenge as a single act. In practice, it is a menu, and the kitchen is cold. One afternoon, the bank's counsel called to ensure their files read the same as mine. We spoke in a language that would sound like weather to anyone else. Dates, docket numbers, receipt stamps, preservation requests, tape logs. When we hung up, the air in the room felt clearer. Truth has that effect when both parties carry it by the edges instead of the middle. They tried to list the house. A sign appeared at an angle in their yard, the price too hopeful for the math they owed. I drove past once and saw a couple stand on the sidewalk, talking quietly with their hands. They didn't go inside. For sale cannot compete with forfeit. October brought wind that lifted leaves and plastic bags and dignity. My nephew texted late one night, "Can we talk, please?" The same 4 words return when people have run out of new ones. I placed the phone face down again and drank water in a dark kitchen that smelled faintly of clean. The servicer asked if I wanted to entertain a trial plan. 3 months of partials to prove intent, then I've seen trial plans become rehearsal schedules for failure. Strict compliance, I said. If a man learns to stand, it should be on the floor, not on a trampoline. By November, we prepared the first of the filings whose names taste like metal. They had time still. There is always a door until there isn't. I slept fine. Winter means more tea, thicker socks, slower thoughts. The file on my desk weighed what it should. I dreamed once of my father's table. He spread bills like maps and said to me at 12, "Boy, we pay what we owe, and we don't owe what we didn't sign." I woke with his voice in my mouth and the smell of paper in the room. I don't put much stock in dreams, but I keep their sentences if they balance. On a sleet-sharp morning, the servicer sent a letter whose last paragraph begins the end. Failure to cure may result in the exercise of remedies, including foreclosure. Words colder than ice, more honest too. I initialed the package release and set the pen down. I took a walk down to the river. The cottonwoods had stopped pretending to be green. Their bones showed. A fisherman stood on the bank in a coat that had seen better weather. We nodded without giving each other anything. The water made its quiet case for continuity. At home, I opened the drawer and looked at the acquisitions tab, now bruised with use. Beneath it lay the trust documents clean, square, satisfied, and the stack of notices that had carried my will in borrowed envelopes. I closed the drawer. Silence is a tool like any other. If you polish it, it gleams. If you wield it well, it cuts. They had used my name as if it were a cloth they could put on and take off. Now their own names clung like wet wool. The cold goes through you faster when you try to wear something that isn't yours. By June, the debt had stopped being private. You could hear it in small places at the grocery checkout when the card failed and the cashier pretended the machine was to blame. In the long pause before the pastor's benediction, when he glanced at the back pew where my nephew no longer sat. In the rustle of programs as people stood and carefully did not turn their heads. Small towns are efficient accountants. They balance reputations faster than numbers. The first absence was the truck. He had waxed it every Saturday, proud as if he'd invented steel. One humid evening, I drove past their house and found the driveway holding nothing but a wet rectangle of oil and the story it told. In its place, a rusted sedan coughed itself awake each morning and returned each night with the sound of a man negotiating with failure. I did not knock. I did not phone. Silence is a compound interest of its own, and I had learned to let it earn. At the hardware store, two men murmured near the nails. He owes Turner too, one said, and I heard he tried to sell tools that weren't paid for. The other shook his head the way people do when they're pleased not to be the subject. The clerk rang me up, without looking up. I signed my receipt in the square, the R rising and the Y hooking, and for a foolish second I felt protective of my handwriting, as if it had been a stray that found its way home. July heat turned the street's tar soft enough to remember footsteps. I stood in my yard in the evening, watering the boxwoods while a robin threw its shoulders against the dirt for a bath. Across, Mrs. Hinson waved her hose in the air and said, "Shame about your nephew, Richard," as if she were asking about rain. I pretended not to hear, the way one pretends not to hear a song that once meant something. The servicer's logs fattened, partial payments like sips, then a month of nothing, then a check that apologized for itself. My attorney forwarded recordings their voices thinner than I remembered, promising next week, then the week after that, then the one after that, the way a man promises to be younger tomorrow. Apply as received per policy. I wrote back. Policy is what keeps pity from spoiling the ledger. One afternoon at the post office, his wife stepped from a line that smelled of cardboard and tape and stood too close. "Uncle Richard," she said, and her voice reached for the softness she used to wear. "You know about all this, don't you?" She meant the letters and the calls and the way friends had become acquaintances. "I hear what everyone hears," I said. She nodded, tried on a smile that didn't fit, and returned to her package the way a person returns to a task that no longer believes in them. I remembered the day they had signed my name. I remembered the towel-soft voice that called the rate friendly, the scuffed pen they left on my table like a souvenir of a crime meant to be charming. In memory, the scene now had a different lighting, not warm kitchen bulbs, but the cold top light of a bank camera that does not take sides. The house on their street began to fail the way houses do when money loses its manners. Grass grew tall, then taller. The porch rail's paint flaked like a scalp with bad news. A blind tilted wrong and stayed wrong. Once, through the open door, I saw a tower of boxes that had been moved to the front room in a ritual older than mortgages. Practice for leaving. Inside my own kitchen, I opened Mallory, Recovery, and slid a new sheet under a new tab. Foreclosure options. The words did not feel like violence. They felt like weather. Beneath them, I drew a ladder of steps my hand could find in the dark. Notice of default already served. Cure period counted without hurry. Title reconfirmed. Taxes tallied. Insurance checked. Occupancy verified. I left a blank line after cash for keys, not as charity but as geometry. Sometimes the straightest path to empty is a small envelope for a clean door. In the margins I wrote memories I would not read aloud. My brother's winter grin behind a counter stacked with screws, The day my father explained that a man should only owe what he signs and then sign clean. The boy my nephew had been, rattling off excuses in a voice that had not yet learned to shake. Memory is not evidence, but it tightens a man's grip on the pen. Late that month, I drove the river road, letting the cottonwoods comb the wind into threads. I parked a block from their house and watched without being seen. A child traced a circle in the dust with a stick, his patience greater than his understanding. My nephew carried a fan from the trunk and set it on the porch, then stared at it as if wind could return the past. His wife stood in the doorway, her arms folded in the way people fold their arms when there's nowhere else to put them. I left them to their air and went home to mine. The kettle sang once and rested. I drank water instead of tea. Sweetness had no part in what came next. The town's calendar flipped. July became August the way breath becomes breath. On the first Monday, a plain envelope arrived at their place and at mine. Inside theirs, an ultimatum. Inside mine, a copy and a date. I placed mine beneath default and drew a straight line across the bottom of the page. A straight line is a promise. Between that line and September stood a white sheet of paper and 4 pieces of tape. I did not sleep poorly. I rarely do. Sleep respects men who have taught it their name. And when the notice finally found their door, it flapped slightly in the morning wind, as though it were practicing the only wave that mattered now. Goodbye. It went up in late September, crooked to the right the way a hand gets after posting more notices than it cares to count. White paper, blue round stamp. Numbers lined like screws set by an old carpenter. The morning wind moved the corner with a shy rustle. Neighbors saw it before they did. News, like birds, knows which roofs will open first. I didn't need to be there. My attorney sent the scan as soon as the server walked off the porch. Still, I drove by the next day because a man ought to stand near the changes he's responsible for. The street smelled of last night's rain. Maple leaves stuck to the asphalt like stamps with nothing left to send. 4 strips of tape pinned the notice to the glass, 4 small, invisible nails. Behind the blinds, daylight pooled into a stubborn gray. I leaned lightly against a lamppost and let the cold run down my sleeve like a quiet reminder. The clock had kept its promise. A child pushed the door-open shirt too thin for the air and stared at the paper the way a hand hovers near a hot stove. He poked the corner and pulled back, instinct beating instruction. A minute later, his mother appeared. She tore the sheet down in a motion that started as anger and ended as grief. The tape left a faint border on the glass little ghosts of obligation marks that would outlast any excuse. People remember adhesive. I went home and slid the copy into notice, drew a clean line under the last entry, and felt the spine of the folder press steadily against my palm. The servicer called with the exact neutrality I pay them for. Cure period expired, she said. We're proceeding. We rehearsed the steps the way 2 old builders talk through a frame angle. Nail, brace, lift. Strict compliance, I said. No sentiment. She laughed softly. You always say that. Straight houses close their own doors, I answered. That afternoon, a for sale sign sprouted in their lawn like a weed pretending to be a tree. The price leaned between hope and math. 2 couples came to look. One tapped the porch post with a knuckle, as if listening for a cavity in old tooth. The agent, perhaps kinder than necessary, explained what the courthouse had already written in larger letters. A week later, embarrassed, the sign disappeared in the dark. The voicemails changed shape. Early ones bargained with days. Now they bargain with miracles and investor cousin, a delayed invoice, a god with a cashier's check. Clerks transcribed the promises into boxes labeled made and kept, only the first column filled. Compassion isn't a line item. Add it to a ledger, and it spoils the page. At the post office, his wife approached with the smell of tape and cardboard hanging on her coat. Uncle Richard, she said, reaching for a softness her voice no longer wore. You know about all this, don't you? I hear what everyone hears, I said. She nodded, tried on a smile 2 sizes too small, and stepped back into a line that had stopped moving. That night I added a page under Remedies acceleration, notice of sale, publication, posting, auction. Beneath it, underlined, cash for keys. Not kindness. Engineering. Hinges swing easier when you oil them. October pressed its hand against the town and smoothed the nap the wrong way. Chimney smoke wandered the streets. Through their kitchen window, I saw them at the island. Elbows on stone. Eyes fixed on the silicone seam, where countertop meets wall. As if it could say something, it could not. The toaster wore a thin coat of dust. Light fell in bars across the floor. Chalk lines children draw when they pretend at prison. I checked title, taxes, insurance the way a joiner lays his palm on a board to find the bulge only wood can feel. Clean enough to sail, the report said, which is as much poetry as I require. I drew a neat box at the top of a fresh page and printed bid. Under it, I penciled 3 numbers and circled the one that could stand on its own feet. Late in the month, my phone showed his name. I let it ring. Courtesy has an expiration date. His message was short and ran out of breath at the end. Uncle, I know you know, if there's anything left to do, for the kids. I listened twice. Then I wrote to counsel, keep the offer. 2 weeks. Broom swept. Keys on the counter. No surprises. The first ad ran in the paper that carries bowling scores on one page and obituaries on the next. I folded it into quarters and slid it into my inside pocket. Some maps you carry even when you can walk the road blind. By the last week of November, their windows were open, cleanser lifted from the floors into the cold air. A mattress leaned in the hall like a tired man against a wall. A lamp was swaddled in a blanket, the cord dragging behind like a tail. They were learning the last choreography a house teaches, how to leave without teaching it to hate you. I sharpened a pencil and added one small square sentence at the bottom of Remedies. Be present. I had been absent when they used my name. I would be present when I used theirs. And as I closed the drawer, the wood answered wood with that familiar, clean, catch the sound a story makes when it has only one chapter left to turn. The packet arrived on a Monday, slender pages, heavy outcome. Date, time, steps. A map that leads only one way. I read it at the kitchen table with my glasses low on my nose. The way I read totals I intend to respect, but will not forgive. I cleared a square on the desk and built the stack a sale day requires. Proof of funds, wire instructions, cashier's checks cut in sensible denominations, and a single page in my own hand dates, amounts, docket numbers, so I could carry the whole history on 4 inches of pencil. At the bottom, I wrote the rule I had kept since the night of the forgery: bid through the trust. No conversation, no victory, only purchase. Dusk found me idling at their corner, engine clicking as it cooled. The porch light burned brighter than usual, as if illumination could argue with consequence. Shadows moved across walls in right angles, the geometry of boxes, the choreography of leaving. A cat slid under a hedge with a self-possession I have always admired. In the morning, I sat in my attorney's conference room breathing paper and toner. We walked the sequence aloud so our mouths matched our notes. Non-judicial sale. Terms published. Cashier's checks accepted. Wire by close of business. You bid in the trust name. If it runs past your ceiling, it won't, I said, boxing the number we had already squared with ourselves. Numbers that stand upright need no adjectives. Cash for keys? She asked. Authorized last week, I said. 2 weeks, decent envelope, decent exit. Doors open easier when you pay the hinge. On my way out, she said, you don't have to attend. We can bid for you. I know, I said, but they signed my name without me. I'll sign without them. I spent the afternoon sanding the noise off my mind. I walked to the river and watched the cottonwoods trade their last coins with the wind. I ironed a shirt no one would notice. I polished my shoes for the man who would wear them. The kettle hummed. I let it. I didn't want tea. I wanted the sound of readiness. Just after dark, the doorbell rang. Through the glass, I recognized a silhouette the house remembered. I opened the door because refusal deserves to know the weight of itself. He stood on the step with a cap in his hands like a boy, waiting to be told what he already knew. Streetlights lifted themselves one by one behind him. Uncle, he said, voice going thin at the edges. He looked past me into the hall mirror that had watched him grow from knees to regrets. Is there anything left to do? For what? I asked. For the house, he said. For us. He still believed the smallest word can carry the heaviest thing. You have the offer, I said. 2 weeks, keys on the counter, broom swept, no damage, no surprises. He nodded the nod a man learns when bargaining is already over. I didn't mean to, he started, then let the sentence die at the edge of the step. I know what you meant, I said. You meant the result without the cost. Meaning isn't payment. We'll leave it decent, he said at last. I expect you will, I said. And for the first time in months, I heard my own voice hold neither heat nor frost, only weather. When he left, I stood with my palm flat against the wood and felt the grain record the moment. I turned off the porch light. The house knew how to sleep. Before dawn, I slid the trust resolution and checks into the leather folder, placed the page of pencil history behind them, and closed the satchel. Outside, the air had that courthouse taste metal. In ordinary-like rooms, where outcomes are decided by the old machinery of yes and no. I locked my door, tested the handle twice, and carried my silence with me, the way a witness carries a Bible, unwilling to swear, unwilling to lie. Courthouse mornings smell the same in every county. Old varnish, cold air, and somebody's contraband coffee losing its nerve. The trustee stood under the eaves with papers clipped to a board like small flags against the wind. Investors gathered in their winter uniforms, muted coats, hands in pockets, eyes that count without moving. A couple of neighbors drifted close, the way people edge toward a storm when they think it might change its mind. I took a place at the rim where sound arrives last. The trust name sat square and patient on the resolution. The trustee cleared his throat and began reading addresses I didn't need. I knew ours by heat alone. Mallory 4-bedroom, 2-bath, he said. The house reduced to a fraction of itself. Opening bid? The number rang out. A man in a brown overcoat raised his chin a quarter inch. A woman clicked her pen. Someone in the back breathed like a winded runner. Bids climb not like hunger, but like posture half-inch lifts that say, I'm still here. I waited. When the increments softened, when roofs, furnaces, taxes, and zip codes finished arguing inside everyone's head, I raised my hand. The trustee pointed. A few more small steps. The overcoat man tipped his head, counted something I couldn't see, and declined. A late voice from the rear tried the trick of confidence. I answered with boredom. Silence has a texture when it lands in public. It passed through the little crowd like wheat giving way to wind. The trustee sang the old 3-count going once, twice, and brought the gavel down. The sound wasn't loud. It was complete. Inside, heat pretended to be air. I handed over the resolution, the checks, the license. Nobody studied. The clerk wrote the receipt number with careful digits, small dignity in transactional weather. Trustee's deed upon sale in 3 to 5 days, she said. Recording would follow. My attorney would mercy every corner. Corners matter. When I stepped onto the square, trucks moved through their routes, and a boy drew a line across the day with his bicycle tire. The town had already forgotten our 15 minutes of arithmetic. I walked to the car without looking for witnesses. Clean subtraction does its own publicity. At noon, the servicer called with a congratulation I didn't need. Possession would follow recordation. The Cash for Keys team had their script-neutral voice. Clear terms, decent envelope, firm deadline. No surprises, I said. No drama, she replied, because we have said these lines enough to stop listening to them. I drove past the house and did not park. Not yet. Paper needed its last ceremony, the recorder's stamp, the image uploaded to the file like a final photograph in a family album nobody else will open. 3 days later, the deed arrived in my inbox with a single sentence from counsel. Attached for your records. I printed it and fed it to acquisitions. The drawer accepted it the way a good map accepts mileage flat, exact, unexcited. The Cash for Keys meeting happened on a Thursday. They signed the short agreement, took the short envelope, left the keys on the kitchen counter where light gathered like small mercy. At dusk, I walked through with the contractor who tells the truth in lists. The air smelled of cleanser and a little sorrow. Cabinets hung open like mouths out of words. In the bedroom, a pale rectangle marked where a picture had once smiled. Roof's tired, he said. One window, paint, deep clean. He itemized decay without gossip. That's why I hire him. We paused in the kitchen. A ring on the laminate showed where a plant had kept its own weather. I set my palm flat on the counter and felt exactly nothing. That is the correct temperature for ownership. Pulse, not adrenaline. Outside, the evening turned the town the color of copper pennies. A neighbor lifted 2 fingers from his pocket, not curiosity, not congratulations. Respect, maybe. Or relief that houses can be steered back to themselves. At home, I placed the keys in the desk drawer where they clicked once against the brass divider and made peace with the other small precisions of my life. My phone buzzed. An unknown number that wanted to be known. We're out. Left it decent. Keys on the counter. Kids' heights are marked on the pantry wall. Sorry we couldn't scrub them off. I stared at the message for a breath and wrote one line to the crew. Photograph the marks. Paint it clean. Children deserve walls that don't remember what they can't yet understand. That night, I took out the pencil page and wrote the last line I had been saving. Acquired by trust at sale, deed recorded. I drew a straight bar beneath it, the way I close a ledger before sleep. People expect triumph, or at least warmth. What I felt was level. A scale corrected. A room returned to true. The quiet that follows a long, precise song. They use my name for their debt. I use their debt to buy what they believe would always answer to theirs. No raised voice, no slammed door. Just a clean tap of a gavel and the softer sound paper makes when it finally admits, in public, what it has been whispering all along. The house sat empty for 2 weeks, though houses never sit empty in truth. They breathe dust. They keep watch with their windows. They whisper when the furnace hiccups. I let it wait. Ownership doesn't need speed. It needs weight. On the 15th day, I drove up the street at a pace too slow for suspicion. The porch still bore the faint tape shadow where the notice had lived. Grass leaned against itself with winter's tired posture. I unlocked the door with the keys that had clicked once in my drawer and entered a silence that turned toward me like a dog deciding whether to bark. The kitchen greeted first, cabinets ajar, as if every plate had walked out mid-conversation. The pantry wall bore those height marks the text had confessed. Pencil lines ascending in uneven hope, April-June, a birthday, one forgotten. I touched the tallest line with a fingertip, then stepped back and drew a square in my notebook. Erase prime paint. Sentiment, like mold, spreads if you don't scrape it. The contractor met me there, clipboard in hand, steel tape hooked to his belt. Roof wants replacing, he said. 2 windows rot on the frames, carpet, don't even bother. Rip it, sand it, finish the boards. He spoke like a man whose faith lives in tools, not prayers. I liked him for that. His crew moved through the house with a rhythm that remembered demolition is just a prelude to order. I spent afternoons watching them peel away the years of their life. Beige paint surrendered to primer. The pantry wall went white, then whisper, gray. The pencil lines disappeared beneath coats, but memory has better ink than paint. I made no note of that. Not everything belongs in the folder. By December, fresh shingles bit the roofline. Gutters held straight water again. A new window reflected the street without distortion. Inside, the house smelled of sawdust and latex sharp, honest odors, the kind you trust. Furniture trucks rattled past, carrying other people's second chances. I stayed in my car with coffee cooling at my elbow, not ready to be mistaken for a neighbor. Neighbors ask questions. Owners answer only with deeds. One evening, I found myself parked across from the old elementary school, staring at a chain-link fence bent where years of children had pushed. The hall lights glowed yellow on tile floors, polished too often to hide the cracks. I remembered his voice on that last step. Is there anything left to do? He had asked like a boy in line at a principal's office. The irony was that the house had been their last chance at growing older without asking permission. They gambled with my name and paid with their roof. Choices, like nails, go in straight but never come back out whole. In January, the property listed. Not flashy, no drone shots or staged flowers. Just clean photographs, corners square, colors neutral. The description read like a resume. 4 bedrooms, 2 baths, updated roof, hardwoods restored. I signed the listing agreement with a pen I sharpened once a month. The number we printed wasn't greedy. Greed had already ruined this house once. It was exact, measured against market comps and my ledger spine. Buyers want fairness, not drama. Showings began. Shoes squeaked across the refinished floors. Children peered into closets and asked if monsters come with deeds. Couples whispered calculations over countertops. Square footage versus dreams, interest rates versus appetite. I watched from a distance, never inside, never close. Revenge has no need for voyeurism. It prefers recordation. One family stayed longer than the rest. She touched the newel post as if it carried stories. He tested window latches, a man whose hands had known drafty winters. Their daughter, maybe 10, bent low to the floor and whispered something to the boards. Perhaps children apologize for things they haven't yet done. I found myself nodding, not agreement, not blessing, just recognition. They would fit. Houses choose their keepers. This one seemed willing to forgive. By March, the contract was inked. Clean contingencies, inspection without argument, closing date aligned with spring's calendar. I placed the documents in dispositions, drew a line under the final subtotal, and added the 2 words every builder, banker, and farmer admires. Net realized. The number did not sing. It stood. The closing took place in a title office that smelled of toner and faint lemon cleaner. They signed where the paralegal pointed. I signed where the paralegal insisted. Handshakes followed, polite, not intimate. Their little girl held the keys, swinging them like bells too heavy for her wrist. The receptionist snapped a photo. I stepped aside, not in the frame. History doesn't need my smile. When I drove away, the house caught the sun on its new roof. Curtains waited to be hung. Toys would soon scatter across the same yard, where a foreclosure notice once trembled in wind. My ledger was closed, my balance corrected, my name restored to its correct weight. Revenge had not burned. It had built. Not loudly, not cruelly, just exactly. That was season 5, the slow transformation of betrayal into equity, of insult into asset. I did not clap, I did not sigh. I only filed the deed under sold and locked the drawer. Spring gave way to a summer that smelled of cut grass and fresh asphalt. By then, I had stopped driving by the house. I didn't need to see its curtains drawn or hear its new laughter leaking from open windows. Ownership teaches distance. Once sold, a house is like a finished sentence, complete beyond revision. What remained was quieter, the echo of my own patience. The family name, once bent by forgery, now stood in straight print on every deed of record. Bankers addressed me with their practiced respect again. Attorneys returned my calls with the swiftness owed to someone who never misses a deadline. Reputation, unlike money, accrues slower but weighs heavier once returned. I kept the folders. Notice, remedies, acquisitions, dispositions, each tab labeled in my hand. They lived in the bottom drawer, not because I needed them, but because drawers, like men, prefer not to forget. Every month I opened them, not to reread but to dust. Revenge loses sharpness if you let it grow cobwebs. Better to polish it quietly, like silver no one else sees. One evening, over bourbon, a colleague asked if it had been worth it. All those months, he said. All that paperwork. Couldn't you have just walked away? Walk away, I repeated, as though trying the phrase in a language I didn't speak. They wrote my name on their debt. They put my signature in rooms where I hadn't stood. If a man walks away from that, what does his name weigh the next morning? He nodded, the way a craftsman nods at a tool he doesn't own but understands. That summer, I took the folder to the lake cabin. Alone, with only Pine for audience, I laid each page across the table. Notices, affidavits, bids, receipts. The gavel's echo pressed between lines of type. I read them as others read scripture, slow, deliberate, eyes moving but lips closed. At the end, I gathered them back into order, clipped them square, and returned them to their drawer. The cabin walls listened without judgment. Revenge doesn't need applause. Sometimes I thought of their children, the pencil marks that Primer had swallowed, the toys carried in cardboard, the whispered goodbyes houses over here. Did I feel pity? Perhaps in the way one feels for a tree struck by lightning. The tree had shape, history, shade. The strike does not ask permission. My role was weather. Their choice was standing in the open with a metal rod in hand. Autumn came, and with it, the county tax bill addressed properly, paid promptly. The circle had closed. From the courthouse's perspective, nothing irregular had ever happened. That was the point. True revenge doesn't shout in alleys. It sits in ledgers and deeds where silence is the loudest witness. By winter, the family had moved to another town. Rumor said they rented, smaller, close to her parents. He worked shifts nobody bragged about. She sold crafts at a holiday market. I didn't confirm. Rumor sufficed. Revenge has no hunger for their daily bread, only for the ledger. The ledger was already square. And so, season 6 closed not with fire, nor with triumph, but with equilibrium. I had been patient. I had been exact. I had turned betrayal into real property, then property into capital. Their laughter no longer lived above forgery. My name no longer floated on someone else's debt. Balance restored. That night, at my desk, I wrote one last entry. File complete. Then I blew the dust from the pencil nub, placed it in the drawer beside the folders, and shut it. The sound of wood meeting wood was the only applause I required.